Before we start, for those that joined us late during the day, I'm Gabriele Zazzara. I'm representing the CENTAUR Consortium here, and I'm chairing this event, and I will guide you. I will be moderating also this panel. How this panel will work, very simple. We'll have a tour de table of the three speakers, and then we will have like few questions from our side to them, and then feel free to add any question you may have in the Q&A section of Zoom, and we will then address them at the end of the panel. So before introducing our speakers, a few more words about to contextualize this panel. First of all, why CENTAUR we are organizing this workshop and why we want to focus on these topics, because we are trying to develop solution in this regard with early warning systems, but more important because as resource scarcity continues to grow worldwide, and issues related to drought, crop failures, water shortages have, let's say, having more impact, and they are increasing in frequency. These topics are very relevant for stakeholders all around the world. These events are affecting local economies and the global economy, and not only the economy, but also the social and political environment, increasing instability in countries, which in turn affects the security in these countries and in the regions. So today we want to explore with our speakers how Earth observation data, as well as machine learning, AI, and other technologies are actually being leveraged to provide early warning systems and all other potential solutions in order to support relevant stakeholders in these situations. And I'm pleased to introduce Yannick Arnaud, which is project manager at EU SatCen. Thank you for joining us. Adrien Detges from Adelphi. He's a senior advisor at Adelphi, and he's also part of the CENTAUR Consortium. And then last but not least, Inbal Becker-Reshef. She's director of the NASA Harvest program. And today she will present her work in relation to food security. So without further ado, I will leave the floor to Yannick Arnaud. The floor is yours, Yannick.
Thank you, Gabriel, and good morning, everyone. First of all, thank you for inviting me to this very interesting panel, in which I will very quickly present you the activity we are running within the European Satellite Center in order to respond to the climate security topic, which envelopes, of course, the water and food insecurity subtopics. I will very quickly go through it and how the Copernicus support to external and security actions is providing information to its authorized community of users. I will share my screen. If you can confirm that you can see it.
I can see your screen,
is it working?
But it's not now. It's the presentation mode, but we can see also your next slide and the notes. So maybe you have to change the display.
Okay. I'm not sure where.
You can try to display setting at the top and change.
Okay.
And change swap.
Okay.
Yeah, now we see correctly your slide.
Okay, here it is. So first of all, some introductory slides for us. Those of you that doesn't know at this point the Copernicus program, and more concretely the Copernicus SESA service that I will present you today. So you know we have these six thematic areas. So under security, there are three that are dedicated to border surveillance, maritime surveillance, and the third one, which is the one that I'm representing today, which is support to EU external and security actions. We provide special intelligence to our authorized users for three main objectives. First of all, to support them in crisis preparedness and planning. So we assist decision makers both at European level and at national level within Europe in planning response to security challenges and crises. Second objective is to strengthen security and crisis response. So we identify potential threats, we assess the risk in these events, and we provide information from the ground, let's say, to take the appropriate actions after an event outbreaks. The third objective is to monitor the implementation of the EU law. So we support the EU institutions in implementing the different EU policies, strategies, and laws such as the CSDP, the Strategic Compass, and the European Green Deal. We have been operational since 2017, and during this time we have received almost 600 activations from the 40 authorized users. As I said, coming from institutions and national agencies. And in response, we produced and delivered more than 1,000 products answering their specific questions and information needs. So some key characteristics of the service. So we work at local scale. So we mainly make use of variable solution data of less than half a meter resolution in order to provide very detailed analysis on any location on Earth. Of course, we are asked to be very reactive in order to provide relevant data after an event or crisis occurs. So usually no more than 48 hours after the event or the request from the user arrives. And considering that there is no, let's say, standardized way of asking, of activating us, so we respond to any information need from our community of user, then we are, let's say, tailored. We tailor all the products and the solutions we provide them. Let's say that we are customized by design. We cover a large number of application areas, and today I would like to focus, of course, on the climate security, which is related to the CENTAUR project. So, as you already very properly introduced, the climate change and the related environmental degradation is recognized as a threat multiplier. It is aggravating the political instability all around the world, and it has serious implications for peace and security across the globe, and of course, for the European interests. It can influence the mobility of people and the international flows, and this may lead to violent conflicts due to growing local tensions and competition for resources. I've included a few statistics here demonstrating that this climate change phenomena is already impacting and already creating displacements and new security situations. SatCen is playing a key role in order to enhance the European Union resilience and action towards the climate change effects. And we provide this special intelligence and related services at 3 different stages. So as you can recognize in here, this is the knowledge pyramid, let's say. So as a first stage, we improve the understanding on the climate security implications. So let's say that we provide situational awareness to our stakeholders by continuously monitoring climate security related events. I will showcase you afterwards some examples on how we provide or how we have been doing it for the last years. The second stage in which we are working and participating to CENTAUR is one of those examples, is one of these initiatives we are driving, is to assess the risk and passing from being reactive to the events to being proactive. So to set up these early warning systems in order to detect the anomalies and try to anticipate the response to the effects that climate hazards has on human security. And the last stage, let's see, which of course CENTAUR also partially covers and other initiatives, is to, let's say, develop these simulation and foresight capabilities in order to anticipate with even more time these situations and act towards it. We cover many different use cases. You know that climate change, of course, is a very transversal challenge. with many different effects. So I've depicted here the main seven that we are addressing. So drought as a precursor of political instability, crisis, and conflict that is covered today. We are also following the transhumance-related conflicts, which are mainly produced in the Sahel region. We are also approaching the climate-induced migration effects and also related to environmental degradation. Water scarcity is one of the hot topics, and of course the competition for scarce resources, which implies. Also, the consequences of climate change on the Arctic and the polar regions is a topic of interest for us, and how the changes in this area is allowing for an increased military activity. We are also interested in working on environmental crime, and the last use case is about the impacts of climate change and extreme weather events on the CSDP missions and operations. Of course, they are very concerned about how climate change is affecting their operations, and also the other way around, how they can, of course, reduce, let's say, their environmental footprint during missions and operations, and we support them with Earth observation and space analysis and data. So the first, let's say, example I would like to introduce you today is very well known. It's the Grand Renaissance Dam project run by Ethiopia. So we know that water scarcity often drives to social tensions and undermine confidence in governments. So to address this, regional and national governments typically invest in water infrastructure, such as canals and dams, in order to improve access and manage resources. However, these efforts are also often cause of tensions and disputes with neighbor countries, in this case with Sudan and Egypt. So the construction of this dam ended in 2023. You know that, let's say, diplomatic and international tensions still exist. And during all this time, we have been asked at SatCen to provide continuous monitoring on the construction works, and also to run simulations, for instance, on the area to be covered by water once the dam will be filled. That has occurred in August this year. The next example is about food insecurity. So we know that crop is a key and strategic resource, but not only for the local population, but as we have seen during the invasion of Ukraine, it is also strategic at global scale. So in 2020, there was an ongoing armed conflict in the Tigray region between the regional authorities and the federal government. So it has to be said that about 75% of the 6 million population of this area are farmers. And most of these people, of course, their life depends on the local crops for survival. So we were asked to perform a continuous monitoring of the damages in the cropland in order to estimate the impact to the local population and, of course, anticipate the humanitarian aid that will be needed. This example is about water availability, water scarcity. So in the Pakistan area, you know that they have many societal challenges in accessing drinkable water. So in that area, we have been estimating and monitoring the large subsidence caused by the underground water extraction in order, again, to estimate the impact on the population. And the last example I would like to introduce you today. So apart from the CENTAUR project, we have been running other pilots and other initiatives in order to set up these kind of systems to provide this information to our users. In this case, we were responsible for setting up a conflict pre-warning map that merges multiple heterogeneous data sources in order to investigate how climate events had an impact on population displacements and conflict. Just a very high level challenges that let's say we have observed or we have suffered, let's say, doing this all these, let's say, initiatives and running these projects. First of all, it's about the multidimensional dimension of climate change, of climate security, sorry. You know that we have the environmental dimension, the meteorological climate dimension, and the societal one. So all in ones interacting. This, of course, is a complex system in which the characteristics of the complex systems applies, like nonlinearity, emergence, and interconnectivity. This means that, you know, making modifications to one of the parts, making, let's say, making up the full system, you cannot predict, you know, how it will apply or how it will affect the full system, either by modifying small pieces, at least theoretically. In these kind of things, systems, there are thousands of variables involved, and of course, simplifications are required. Therefore, it is not easy to model and predict, and of course, to weight the different variables in order to anticipate the event or phenomena you are aiming to predict. Let's say the second main challenge is the multi-scale also approach, in which several times we are asked to, let's say, anticipate or analyze local or regional effects that are based, in fact, on national or global models or phenomena like climate change or meteorological or atmospheric, let's say, physics, biophysical parameters. And also the other way around, in which we try to respond or to anticipate conflict prediction at the international level by observing, let's say, local or regional conflicts or events. The third main challenge I would like to mention is about data availability, that especially affects the socioeconomic dimension. Of course, satellite imagery allows us to cover, like in a continuous way and at global scale, all the biophysical parameters. But on this case, there is still a lack of mid and long-term time series. We have heterogeneous coverage in both spatial, temporal, and from an accuracy point of view. And we also have very heterogeneous data formats that should be invested and harmonized in order to make them comparable and to be able to work with them. This is just, let's say, an introduction for the discussion we have afterwards, and I will be happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Yannick. Thank you very much for this informative presentation. Now it's the time to move on to our next speaker, Adrien from Adelphi, and he's also part, of course, of the CENTAUR Consortium, and he will present some key takeaways from climate security research. So Adrien, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gabriel, and of course, very excited to be part of this conversation this morning. Let me just share my screen and make sure everything looks nice.
Now it's not yet in the presenting mode, but now it is. Perfect.
Okay, great. Okay, so like you said earlier, I'm a senior advisor with Adelphi, which is a German think tank that focuses on everything sustainability, green economy, renewable energy, etc. But we also have a team dedicated to assessing the impacts of climate change on human security, and that comprises water security, food security, livelihood security, the risk of conflict and displacement, and other things. So basically a lot of the topics that we also cover in this panel. So I understand that many here in the audience have a deep knowledge of early warning systems and of geospatial analysis, but maybe not necessarily of the climate security literature, which forms the basis for many of the things we do in CENTAUR. And Yannick already provided some excellent examples of applications in that domain. But I wanted to step a little bit, take a step back and maybe give a more high-level overview here, in a sense of giving you some background on how, as a research community, we came to the point to seriously consider climate indicators as inputs for conflict prediction models and early warning systems, a point where we got stuck along the way, and what we can do in this domain moving forward. So for starters, if you haven't really heard that much about it before, climate security research essentially investigates the relationship between climate change or adjacent issues like extreme weather events or and different dimensions of human security. And I'll be mostly talking here about extreme weather events like droughts and violent conflict, but most or many of the things that I'm saying here also apply to the study of forced displacement or food insecurity in the wake of climate change and climatic shocks. So the popularity of climate security research, especially the computational analysis in that domain, really started to go up, let's say 10 to 15 years ago. So around that time, we have the 5th assessment report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that comes out in 2014. And this report discusses climate security connections much more prominently than previous reports. And we also have high-level influential figures like Barack Obama here, talking about the security implications of climate change. And it becomes sort of a popular idea in policy circles that to treat climate change as a threat multiplier that could lead to more conflict, more displacements, etc. But there's also another factor here that benefits this research agenda. So since the late 2000s, conflict researchers are more and more invested in studying conflict risk at a subnational level. So you have to understand this is even before Russia has annexed Crimea. And at that time, we don't really see many conflicts between countries, but rather within countries, and often only involving small portions of that country's territory. And so there's a whole research stream that starts building subnational data sets, like the ACLED data set, if you're familiar with it, and using GIS tools to study these local conflicts and predict conflict risk at subnational level. And this evolution of conflict analysis is crucial because it produces very granular conflict data that can be combined with very granular meteorological data to study climate conflict correlations at subnational level. And so that's perfect, people think. Everyone is talking about climate change as a threat multiplier, and we now have these super subnational data on climate and conflict. And yeah, you know, let's just throw them in our models and our conflict predictions will become much, much better. Or so they think. Because it turns out that adding meteorological data to your model doesn't necessarily make it much, much better at predicting conflicts. So several people have tried this and with mixed results. So there are reasons for that, but I don't want to go too much into technical details here. I rather want to emphasize the lessons that we can learn from this experiment. If our goal is indeed to use climate indicators with conflict risk models for the purpose of building effective early warning systems. So very quickly, there are essentially two things I want to highlight here that can get in your way when using climate indicators with conflict risk models. And the first has to do with socioeconomic, political, and other context variables. So you have to understand that no two places will have the same experience around climate change and potential conflict risk. Rich communities with stable institutions, cohesive social relations, and technical capacities. So let's say they have very sophisticated irrigation systems. Those communities are in a very, very different place when it comes to the effects of climate change than less cohesive communities with weaker institutions or with a high dependence on climate-sensitive activities like rain-fed agriculture and pastoralism. So that sort of makes sense, right? But these context factors should really be included in climate conflict models. And the second problem has to do with the scale and scope of the risks you want to capture in your model. So those among you in spatial analysis will be familiar with the concept of ecological fallacies. In our context here, it means that really depending on the scale at which you collect your data, you might find very different patterns in it. So let's say you observe violent cattle raids, and yeah, cattle raids are a very typical example of a climate-related conflict. They occur in the Sahel and East Africa mostly, and they're they're kind of the go-to example in climate conflict research. So let's assume you collect data on these conflicts at the district level. And you see that cattle raids happen more often in districts with, on average, lower precipitation throughout the year. But then when you zoom in and start collecting much more granular data on conflict locations, you might see that within these districts, cattle raids tend to occur in comparably wet areas with better vegetation conditions for grazing cattle, but of course also for hiding and ambushing other herders. So depending on the level at which you collect your data, you're in fact looking at two very different aspects of cattle raids. One is about water scarcity as a factor in cattle raiding, and the other one is about more tactical considerations of cattle raiders with regard to local vegetation conditions. And if you don't pay attention really to the subtleties, you can easily get confused and use the wrong scale for the wrong type of analysis. And the point I'm trying to make here is that there are many pitfalls and that the results of your prediction model will be tremendously influenced by design choices like scope and scale or the context variables that you include. And I'd say there's no single model that will be good at capturing all of these aspects. Some models will be good at capturing some of them, and other models will be good at capturing others. So I'd say you have to choose, really. So where do we go from here? And my first recommendations at this point would be to be very mindful and very explicit about your model design choices and answer the following questions. Why, in the first place, are you really developing a prediction model? What is it that you really want to learn from it? And once you have clarified this for yourself, more technical questions follow, like what's the right scope and scale for my model? What context variables should I include, and so on. And yeah, you might say this sounds trivial, but you'd be surprised how often I've seen these things not really given much considerations when developing a model. And my second recommendations would be to live with the consequences of your choice. You have to sort of accept the fact that your model will not be great at doing everything. And I guess that's okay, because other research team can work on other models and fill the gaps. And I think ideally we should work towards a distribution of tasks here, where different teams work on different models that can all become part of a wider toolbox. And then users can just draw from this toolbox depending on their needs in a concrete situations. And they might have some models with a high prediction accuracy and other models that are a little bit more sensitive to the effects of droughts and other climatic shocks. Okay, so I hope you didn't mind this little, this brief history of climate conflict research, because I think the background and concepts introduced here, they're important elements to consider for the topic of our panel discussion. And I hope they will also help you appreciate the work that CENTAUR and other teams are doing in that domain. So yeah, thanks for indulging me.
Thank you, Adrien, very much for your presentation, and definitely has given us more information to better contextualize and understand the discussion today. So moving forward now to our last speaker of the second panel, I'm happy to introduce you to Inbal, and she's the director of NASA Harvest, and she will present very soon. I see you already sharing the screen. I don't know if we can hear you too.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly. Great. And we see correctly these slides. So Inbal, thank you for participating today, and the floor is yours.
Great, thanks very much for including me. And I think the discussion has already been great and a very good setup for what I'm going to talk about. See if I can. Okay, and so maybe just stepping a step back, I know we've talked about this already in different ways today, but food security is one of the biggest challenges that we face in this century, and especially under a warming climate, as we've been hearing. And so looking at some of the most recent statistics coming from the FAO SOFI report, 733 million people around the world face severe food insecurity. Of course, that is not equally distributed around the world, with 1 in 5 of those in Africa. And I've put here different statistics that I think are quite alarming and really show that we're way off track when we think about the SDG 2 zero hunger. But I also wanted to mention that with COVID initially, and then with the Ukraine war, these really brought food security back to the forefront of a lot of government's attention. And similarly to things we've heard today, has also started to equate food security with national security for obvious reasons, with some people even asking the question, is food actually going to be our new oil? So innovation is really needed in terms of being able to develop and monitor our agricultural systems across the globe. And of course, satellite data, as we've been hearing, is really one of the only tools that helps us to be able to do that. And so that's the context for NASA Harvest. NASA Harvest is NASA's Global Food Security and Agriculture Program. We are a consortium, so we're a consortium of many different partners, including many European partners. We actually have a hub at University of Strasbourg. And we are NASA's contribution into the G20 GeoGLAM program. I think some of you are part of that as well. We're very much, as you've heard already from other organizations as well, end user driven. And so a lot of the work we do is very directly in support of and co-developed with our different end users and partners. So just to give you a brief overview of the types of impact areas that our program is focused on, going from markets and supply chains, early warning and early action, which we've heard a lot about, climate risk assessments, insurance and climate finance. And the one that I want to talk about today and focus in on is rapid action for policy support. And so we get a lot of different requests regarding different agricultural events, including or primarily focused on three main areas. One is armed conflicts and war, and I'll give examples of those, climate change and extreme weather events. And then increasingly, we're getting requests around decreasing market transparency. And so you think of different countries that could have a very large impact on agricultural markets that are not transparent in terms of the agricultural production, in terms of their trade, in terms of their stocks. So those are I would say, primarily the types of questions we get. We're in the process of setting up a center or facility around this, and integrating that within frameworks also of the G20 AMIS and GeoGLAM. And so I'd like to talk a little bit more about this and give some examples. So this was a request that we had around the war in Sudan from USAID, of course, trying to assess the impact on food insecurity and understand also geospatially. And so here, I think earlier you saw an example around Tigray. And so this is a similar kind of a question of what has been the impact on cropped area. And what we see in Sudan is there's been a large decrease between 2023 and 2022, and we're now doing the 2024 as well, with some areas experiencing 20 to 40% reduction in cropped area. And of course, this has very significant consequences for food security and being able to inform humanitarian aid. And this is work being led by Hannah Kerner at ASU. We had another very similar kind of request, and I think going back to what we just heard, that context is really important. The assumption that conflict is immediately going to equal lost cropped area is not one that you can always make. Okay, and so here's almost the opposite, where we looked at the North Kivu area in DRC, and here we mapped at 3-meter resolution cropped area, active crop area. And what we saw that there actually was no large-scale abandonment. And in fact, what we heard then from the ground, and actually worked also with ACLED and some of the insights and resources that they had, that a lot of the reports were indicating that farmers were continued to farm. They were now paying rent to the occupiers, whether that was M23 or others. There were different taxation points that were imposed. But on a large scale, we didn't see what we expected to see, which was large-scale abandonment. And so the third example, and this one I'll go into a lot more detail, was the invasion of Ukraine, the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine. And when the war started, we had a request from the Ministry of Agrarian Policy and Food of Ukraine to support them in assessing what has been the impact of the war on agricultural production in Ukraine. And importantly, looking at the occupied territories separately from the government-controlled territories, right? Because the government-controlled territories still had information coming in, but there's no information now available for occupied territories. And remember, the assumption always was that that area was just going to be, no production was going to come out of that area. And so here, I'd like to recognize different partners that we've been working on this work. And so the first thing we looked at was how much of Ukraine's cropland area was Russia occupying. And initially it was 23%. Of course, large areas were then liberated, and currently it stands at around 20%. And we partnered here with the ESA World Cereals program, as well as other organizations, to be able to first map out how much areas is under Russian occupation. And this, as I'll show, leaves a really significant gap in agricultural statistics. The other thing we've been working on is looking at, well, how much land has actually been abandoned? And so here we're looking at an image from 2023 where we start to see this green area right along the front line, very green. And what that is when land is abandoned, again, depending on the context, if you've got some of the most fertile land and soil in the world, then when you abandon it, of course, it's going to become green. You think about your garden, there's rain, there are different seeds, there's vegetation is going to grow. And that's exactly what we saw. There was green vegetation coming up around the time when the winter crops were coming out of dormancy, but it then stays green throughout the entire season until the end, actually, of the summer crops. And so we can map that. And what we see here are a few different interesting things. We, of course, see the front line. We also see the areas that were liberated earlier on in 2022, both in Kharkiv and in Kherson. And here I've mapped on top of this is not our work, the yellow Russian fortifications, but that's kind of supporting evidence to what we're actually being able to map on our side of where those fortifications are. And we estimate this is around 7.5% of Ukraine's total cropland. This was a 2023 assessment. And that translated roughly to $2 billion lost harvest had they been able to cultivate that land. Said all that, well, I'll show one more example, actually, that we had a request, and then I'll go into us looking at the statistics themselves, which is where I started. But there was also, of course, the Kakhovka Dam collapse, and here we teamed up with CERTET, who ran the flood analysis, and initially, in the first day or so, the assessment from the government was that there was a much larger area of agricultural land that was flooded. But of course, the main concern for agriculture is not the flooding, but rather the source of irrigation, right? This is a semi-arid part of Ukraine, very heavily irrigated. And so we have now been mapping the irrigation or loss of irrigation in this area in Kherson. And we basically see that by 2024, there is no irrigation at all left in this area. Of course, if you think of climate and climate change, this is an area that is semi-arid and is more prone to droughts as well. Okay, so coming back to then our statistics, we've been working on estimating statistics again by occupied and Russian-controlled territories. And we've done that now for 3 years for the main export crops in Ukraine. And against most expectations, and also against the reporting, especially of global statistical agencies, Ukraine didn't have as large of a reduction in production as has been reported. Instead, a large production of Ukraine's agriculture is being harvested under Russian-occupied territories, and therefore not being reported in official statistics. And so that creates a big gap in statistics and also continues this narrative that Ukraine has lost a tremendous amount of agricultural production. It's not that it hasn't lost, it has, but it's not on the order of what we've been seeing reports. So we first want to, of course, make sure that what we're doing with satellite data makes sense and that we can then apply this into the occupied territories. And so we've been working very closely with the State Statistical Service of Ukraine. And what we've done initially is compare our estimates that are satellite driven with their estimates for the government-controlled territories. And so here I'm showing those for wheat. The big is production, and then you can also see yield and harvested area. And our numbers are very close, which builds our confidence, and more importantly, their confidence in our ability to then estimate what's going on in the occupied territories. And what we find is that up until now, over the last 3 years, 23.6 million tons of grains and oilseeds have been harvested in occupied territories. When we look at wheat, which is the largest share of that, that's equivalent to about 10.5% of Russia's exports since 2022. And it's around 2.5% of global wheat trade, or 26% of US wheat exports. Okay, my point is this is not a negligible amount of grain. And what this does, when the storyline and the narrative we have been hearing, and this large focus, and here I'm putting a science news article that just came out that does the same, when we highlight the crop losses in Ukraine, and understandably, we want to be able to highlight what the damage has been of this horrible war. But essentially what we're doing is that we're not talking about all the crops that are being harvested under Russian occupation, not being reported, and probably somehow making it, of course, into Russian exports and production and stocks, okay? And so here on the left side, what I'm showing is the production of Ukraine, according to official global statistics. This is the blue line. And then coming in from the wartime, these are our estimates. And so showing here what the difference has been in estimates. And I should say the other organizations that are looking at this also are the JRC, and they report 2 bulletins, one in June and one in September, where they report on all of Ukraine and then on the government-controlled territories. Why is this important? Well, if we look at on the other side on who, and coming back to the security question, Who's relying on Russian exports? Well, what we see is in the Middle East and Northern Africa, home to about 550 million people, obviously a political fragile part of the world. Food security is critical to their national security. We see an increase of 20% of reliance on Russian wheat exports. And if we look at going back to the climate side of things, Russia tends to be more volatile in terms of the impacts of droughts and climates than some of the other major exporting countries. And it's certainly prone to those. And so increasing a dependency on a country that could have more climate volatility is, of course, a massive risk, not just to those dependent areas, but really, given the size of Russia's component of agricultural exports, this is a real threat overall to prices. And so this is some of the reports that have come out on our work. I think some of the things that I would really like to highlight, and I think has been highlighted before, is that it's really, really critical to be driven by our end users, right? And so this work is done in very close coordination with the Ministry of Agriculture and the State Statistical Service, and therefore they have been able to use and uptake this information into their own decisions. And the other thing I want to highlight is satellite data really does oftentimes provide the only means of information in areas that are ridden by conflict or extreme weather events. And I think we have seen a large advance in our capabilities in the recent years, which is very exciting. So I'd like to just acknowledge a lot of people who've worked on this, and also a lot of the institutions that we've collaborated with or funded or provided different data sets as well into this Ukraine work. And with that, I'll stop. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the very interesting presentation about the work performed by NASA Harvest. So now is the time for the more interactive discussion. I want to first of all I want to thank you all you speakers for the presentation given, and on the other hand I want also to thank you the participants which already have shared some questions for the Q&A at the end. So we'll start with a few questions from our side, and then we'll move on to the Q&A. If you, Yannick, Adrien, or Inbal, if you want already to answer via message in the Q&A section, you can feel free to do it. Otherwise, we will discuss these topics later on. So a first question from my side. We have seen from your presentation different activities performed, and I wanted to understand better what role should international organizations play in addressing climate-driven security risks, and how they can actually be better integrated into national and global strategies. Based on your presentation, we have seen already successful examples, but what are, let's say, the key takeaways from your experience on to be shared in this regard? No one wants to start?
Okay, I can take this one.
Great. Thank you very much,
Gabriele.
to break the ice.
Okay. So when we approach some of these new so-called new security challenges, like for instance, climate security, in my experience, it works like niche topics, right? In which at least during these initial phases, you only have specialized researchers and technicians, that can really understand the phenomena and being able, to assess the potential impacts and consequences of this phenomena. So I have to say that at least in the security area, this is considered an emerging application area. So many people heard about it, but they approach us with a great interest, but they have very few, let's say, preliminary background knowledge in order, to assess and interpret the results. So in our case, and probably in the case of NASA Harvest, probably they have something similar to say, but we have an important role, I would say, to play as leaders in adopting, these tools, and also to promoting as facilitators the use of these kind of tools and understand, the phenomena and the interactions that are behind towards our community of users. So I will say that I will finish up that we are currently, as I was saying, collecting, merging, and digesting, all this technical and academic information, which is available out of there, and trying to make, life of our users easier in order to provide them something, that they can easily ingest into their chains of command, their day-to-day work or decision-making processes.
Thank you. Thank you, Yannick. I see that Inbal, you're already unmute. I think you want to add something.
I can just add to that, if I understood the question correctly. I mean, I think it's really important that we start to think about different communities that don't always come together, right? And so you have the economics and trade communities with the food security and early warning communities, with the remote sensing, with the machine learning, right? And with the national security. And I think oftentimes we're talking to ourselves, or we're very comfortable within our own. And really, I think these challenges require us to be reaching out our networks and coming together more to think creatively about how do we address these, and how do we translate our knowledge and the science and driven information into information that can actually be in the hands of those that need them in a useful way, because oftentimes the data is there, but it's not done correctly, or it's not integrated with those that should be using that, and therefore it doesn't translate, or it doesn't end up in those workflows, or it's not adapted to their system. So I think there's a lot more we could be doing in terms of better coordination and collaborations. And then I think there's always also that tension between, especially in this space of, you need rapid information to inform policies, and science, and to be sure and to have your uncertainties takes a lot of time. And so how do we bridge that between what can we feel like is confident enough and provide the uncertainties such that policies can take these up and not wait a year, and by that time, that whatever that crisis or information need was is gone. And I think that's still a challenge we ought to work more on. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Inbal. Adrien, yeah.
Yes, no, I completely agree with Inbal. I mean, yeah, a lot of the information is being siloed and not necessarily shared. And I think, yeah, that has partly to do with the capacities and coordination, but to an increasing extent, I'm afraid with like the rise of AI and technologies, that there would also be some business interest just not to share your data, or you're for concerned that your competitor might come up with a more powerful model. So I think going forward, this is also something that we need to be concerned about, and think about the different interests involved in the development of such models. And I would say the second thing that comes to mind is that there is there's a digital divide or gap. I mean, some communities and countries have different access to data, different access to those models. And you have initiatives at the UN level, like Early Warning for All, that seek to equip everyone with an early warning system. But I guess this is still quite a big challenge that warrants the involvement of international organizations at this point.
Thank you. Thank you, Adrien, for providing also an answer in your contribution. Moving forward to a second question from my side, then I will move to the Q&A, because we already have several questions. I think it would be nice to address them. So based on your presentation, of course, we have always mentioned the use of Earth observation data, but in order to validate and improve your models, and of course, you need to integrate different types of data, also data from the ground. So based on the sensitivity of the topics and the type of products you can, and the analytics and insights you can actually provide, how do you integrate those data? How do you guarantee these data are, let's say, correct in some way, useful?
I can start and say, obviously, ground data is always going to be critical. I think we always have to be careful that ground data is not necessarily ground truth, right? And anybody who's worked with a lot of ground data knows that there are a lot of errors that can be in those kinds of data. But nevertheless, we have to have those to be able to, as you said, to train and to validate models. I think, as Adrien said, we're seeing more and more capabilities and models coming out also with the advances also in machine learning. And I think overall that's very positive, of course, and having open systems and processing and cloud compute. But I think that also puts more of the burden on the users to understand what are the products that they're using? What are their uncertainties? Because the fact that somebody made a map doesn't necessarily mean that it's accurate, right? And so I think in one sense, it's great that we have these tools, but on the other sense, I think users have to be a lot more knowledgeable and to ask the right questions and to assess how and what they're using. And of course, ground data becomes critical. I think we've got to be much more creative about how we get that ground data. I think a lot of it sits in the private sector and it's under IP and it's, different reasons not to share it, of course. But I think there are a lot of ways in which we could help to unlock a lot more of it. And to be more open about it and to have better public-private partnerships that can articulate mutually beneficial propositions, can make sure that some of these data are going into the products, but maybe not be shared with everybody. I think, again, the World Serials is a great example of some of the data collection they've done, and it's been a massive effort on the cropland and crop type side to bring together a variety of sources into a harmonized database for use by the broader community. So I think there are a lot of good examples of how to do that and promising, but of course, this is always going to be a challenge.
Thank you. Thank you, Inbal. I don't know if Adrien or Yannick, you want also to address this question. I can remind it to you. It's regarding how to ensure the data from the ground and other type of sources are integrated, and how to ensure that these are actually most probably correct data to inform your models and analysis. I know it's a complex question. Okay. If you prefer to move on, we can move to the question in the chat. So I have a first question, and I'm thanking, I hope I will pronounce it correctly, is Zigwai Ayuba, which he is directing the question to you, Yannick, and you, Adrien, but I think also Inbal may have something to add here. So thank you for sharing your knowledge. May I know if you have carried out any research on climate and security in Nigeria? If yes, are you able to share some top lessons from Nigeria on how you have used early warning as a tool to address climate and security challenges?
I will partially answer to this question, and it is also related with your previous question. Of course, we will know, but for the benefit, of the early warning accuracy and performance, ideally we will have to rely on open systems and interoperability within these data spaces, let's say. But this is true, unfortunately, within the security, let's say, community, there is a principle in which, by default, everything from data to systems to platforms are in principle restricted only to authorized users. So we are trying to overcome these, limitations, but by designing, multi-level systems in which, for each platform system, you have different accreditation levels and access level in which one part will be public, another restricted, and another even classified. Of course, it makes our lives much more difficult, but I think this is the way, both for the benefit of all the communities, and also, as I was saying, for the performance of our own models. Responding to this concrete question, I cannot bring you access. We have covered this area, it's true, but it's not public, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you, Yannick, for giving us your contribution on this. Adrien, I see you're on mute.
Yes, to the question. So Nigeria has not been part, unfortunately, of our first pilots in CENTAUR. We've been looking at Mozambique, Mali, and Somalia. So from the perspective of the project, not necessarily insights we have on Nigeria, but there has been other work conducted on Nigeria. There's some statistical work by the crisis group that can be recommended. And there has also been work from colleagues at Adelphi that have worked specifically on Nigeria. Not quantitative analysis, though. So I'm not sure if we can, from that, we can really share insights in terms of early warnings or in terms of the probability or predictions around conflict.
Thank you, Adrien. I don't know if Inbal, you want to add something on this question?
Yeah, I know we've had different discussions through our Africa activities through Catherine Nakalembe's work, and so she's had different discussions with different entities in Nigeria, but we don't currently have an active project on this. Okay, just one little addition on this, which relates to food security. I know that Peter Salomon already left because he had other activities to be done. Nonetheless, also Copernicus CEMS has done something in terms of food security in Nigeria, in the Borno region, addressing analysis related to crop change detection. Maybe we can send the link afterwards in the chat for you to know more about also what Copernicus can provide in this regard. Moving forward to the next question we have on our list. This question is addressing you, Adrien. Valentin Felix Geyer, again, I'm sorry if I'm misspelling names. So first of all, thanks for the insightful intervention. Given the different spatial and temporal scales at which climate, weather, and different types of conflict interact, how do you assess the adequacy of prediction models that focus on outcomes that aggregate these conflict types? For example, where the outcome is simply conflict or violence, in light of your argument to distribute tasks, wouldn't be, that's a long question, would it make more sense to use different prediction models for different disaggregated conflict types, or will this run into rare event issues?
No, that's an excellent question. It really puts the finger on a pain point in this domain. So there are in fact several questions, and I guess I would answer each one of them with yes. So theoretically, yes, of course, we can think about different conflict types in terms of having different spatial and temporal dynamics, and we can go very far in disaggregating these types and in developing specific models for each type. And then, of course, we have this rare event issue that limits us. So I guess the answer here would be that there is really a trade-off. And again, I would stress that it really depends on the question you want to answer or the type of insights you want from your model. And this will then help you to really make a decision on this continuum between more specific models for more specific conflict types versus a model that can just capture more events. But it is true, yeah, that the rare event issue is really a challenge when it comes to predicting conflicts in general.
Thank you, Adrien, for providing an answer. I don't know if other speakers want to add anything here. Okay, so we have one more question here from Bezir Rayet. The question is for Inbal. Could we blame commodity markets and future price speculation, etc., behind the lack of transparency? If we study Russia's blockade, sabotage of Ukraine grain with immediate effects to Africa, creates complex crises, can we bring in more stakeholders for better situational awareness?
I mean, I think we can blame the countries that are not transparent, right? And so Rosstat, which is a statistical service of Russia, has stopped providing some national in-season estimates of their production. I think they also are no longer providing information on their exports. I would be happy to be corrected on that, but that's my recollection. And so that means that then when you have uncertainty on a country that has almost a quarter of wheat export shares, of course that creates uncertainty in markets. I think, you know, the global organizations that are not reporting on full Ukrainian statistics is nothing other than there is no information on that, and it's very challenging to do that. So I think really it's coming from the other side of having that information and having transparency.
Thank you. Thank you, Inbal, for your contribution on this. I guess we are done with this panel. So very much thank you to all of you to have participated and given your availability for this, contributing to to this panel.